Hello and welcome back to the Exceleration Netcast. In this episode, we have a problem wherein we get this report every week or so. This is from my lemonade stand, by the way, and we've got all our different employees here down on our rows, and across the columns we have different weeks. So this is 2014 week 51, 2014 week 52, 2015 week 1, 2015 week 2. You get the idea. And for each one of those weeks, we have reported the number of hours that an employee worked. And what we want to do is we want a new column over here which says what is the last week for which they work and completed hours. Because you'll notice some weeks are blanks, in which case that they were just never assigned any hours to work. Other weeks there's a zero, so they were like maybe assigned hours and maybe they gave them to somebody else. For some reason, it returns a zero. So we want to ignore blanks and ignore zeros. And also, since we didn't write this report ourselves, it's possible that somebody could sneak some text in here, something along the lines of like no value or something like that. And so we also want to be able to safely ignore that in case that pops up in some future report. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by creating a positional array, which is to say an array that has the positions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in it, because later on we're going to use that array to go choose one of these header values. So let's start off. I'm going to start by using the indirect function. You guys have probably seen this trick before. The indirect function takes a text string and converts it to a range. So we're going to start with A1 through A and close the text string, concatenate that. Now, if I did something like a literal, or not even a literal, if I did something like 15, let's just take a look at what that looks like. So let's think about what this is doing. It's going to join A1A with 15. It's going to get A1A15, and it's going to return a range reference to those cells. Now, if I wrap the whole thing around a row function, what I'm now going to get is I'm going to get the numbers 1 through 15. F9, there you go. Okay, well that's exactly what we want, but we want it a little bit more robust than that. We don't want to hard code 15 in there. If we were going to do that, we could just hard code the array itself. So now we want to know is how many columns are here in the headers. Well, that's easy. We're just going to do the columns function. Returns which column it is. Columns returns how many columns are in a given range. Click there. So we're going to select that and hit F4. Lock it. Actually, we don't really need to lock it, but I don't know. I'm just going to. All right. So the next thing we're going to do right now, if I hit F9 to evaluate it, we get something that looks like what we want. But if you know arrays pretty well, you notice that this is a horizontal array, and we're going to have to compare it to vertical arrays. So Control Z. What we're really going to do is we're going to wrap the whole thing in a transpose, so that now, when I highlight and hit F9 to evaluate it, we've actually got an array that's sort of vertical. It's going downward. Control Z. Okay, so now that we've got that array, that was kind of the first big hurdle. What we're going to do is we're going to use some Boolean logic to knock out cells we don't want. So if you can imagine, right now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got an array that has something that looks like that. And what we want to do is everywhere that there's a blank or a zero or text or something like that, we want to convert that position, like in this case 4, to 0. In this case 2 to 0. And in this case blank to 0. And when we do that, when we're all done, we're just going to be left with the positions of the numbers that actually exist, which will get us our rightmost position. Okay, so I'm going to hit, since we're kind of running out of room, I'm going to do this over multiple lines. I'm going to hit Alt-Enter to enter a line break into my formula. Usually not a good idea to leave those in there because they confuse people, but while you're writing, they're certainly just fine. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this array and multiply it by a test, and that test is going to deliver trues and falses, and everywhere that there's a true, when I multiply it, it's going to leave the position as is, and if it's a false, as in it doesn't pass the test, it's going to multiply it by 0 and therefore return a 0. So let's go ahead and do our slightly more necessary test. So we're going to ask the question: is anything in this range greater than 0? Right? So if I hit F9 to evaluate it, well, that's greater than 0. That's not greater than 0. That is greater than 0. That's not. That's not. So we get true, false, false. Hit Control Z to undo that. Now, if you apply any math to Booleans, it'll convert the trues to 1s and the falses to 0. So if I hit F9 to evaluate it now, rather than true, false, false, I get 1, 0, 1, 0, 0. Control Z. But since this multiplication is there, that counts as math, so I'm going to go ahead and remove these. You can leave them in. They're not necessary. Maybe they make it easier to read, but they're not needed for the formula. Okay, so now if I take, let's see, so let's just remind ourselves where we're at. Oop. I'm going to highlight this whole thing without the, if I can manage to do this. I don't want to highlight the multiplication, so I hit F9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Control Z, and we had our 1s and 0s test before. If we multiply them together, we get 1, because this is 1 times 1, 0, because this is 2 times 0, 3, because this is 3 times 1, and 4 times 0, and 5 times 0. So now we're left with only the positions that passed the first test. Control Z to undo that. All right, that's good, but we want to make sure that there's also no text sneaking around in here. If there is, it might screw things up. So we're going to multiply this, Alt-Enter again, by is number. So we're going to check to see, hey, this should be a number, right? We expect it to be 99% of the time, but in case it's not, we're going to cover ourselves. So now we actually get the same result, but we're protected in case there's a text value in there. If I hit F9, now I get the positions of things that both were greater than 0 and not numbers, and anything that failed either one of those tests, I get a 0. Control Z to undo that. Okay, so that was the really hard part. What I want to do now, I'm going to hit Alt-Enter to give myself a new line. I'm going to wrap this whole thing in max, right? So now that I've got a list of all the positions, if I take the max, so if I take the max of this right here, what I end up with is the rightmost position. See this 3? That ends up being the rightmost position. And that's exactly the position that I want. So I'm going to go grab this guy up here, which is the 1, 2, 3rd position. Control Z to undo that. So if I take the max, F9, I get the value I want. Fantastic. From here, we're going to take that position and use it inside of an index. So I'm going to Alt-Enter. Click up here. Index. Alt-Enter again. So what's the range we want to pull from in this index? Oops, don't like that. There we go. Here, I'm going to, let's see, can I max? Let's see, there we go. Maybe you like that better. So what about this? Do you like that? Boy. For some reason it wants to, let's do it this way. Just copy and paste it. Control C, Control V, okay. That seemed to work a little better. Not sure what that error was all about. So index is going to say, hey, go to this range right here and give me the position. And the position is this whole big thing that we figured out here, the 3rd position in this particular instance. So now if I hit Control Shift Enter, I get 2015-01. All right, so that's sort of the workhorse of this. We've sort of got everything we need. By the way, when you hit Enter, be sure and hit Control Shift Enter. If you enter it without Control Shift, it's an array formula. It will break. So let's grab the fill handle and drag down here. The only problem we have is some corner cases, which may or may not appear in your data, but in my data it does appear. We've got this row here for employee 9 where they never ever worked. So to say that they worked their first week 2014-51, well, that's inaccurate. We actually want something else here. And here we've got a person that was assigned two shifts, maybe more, but they never actually ended up working. So both of these should be something else. So I'm going to do Control Z to undo that. So this is pretty common. What we're going to do is we're going to wrap this whole thing inside of an if statement. And we're going to check to see if we've got one of those corner solutions or corner cases. If we are, we'll deal with that. And if not, we'll just use this thing that we built. So I'm going to hit Alt-Enter right there. So I'm going to do if, open parentheses, Alt-Enter, close parentheses. Okay, so the first thing is, what is the test? And the test that I came up with that works pretty well is I want to know if the average of all these, let's see, I'm sorry, not the average, the max. I want to know if the max of all these is equal to 0. And oddly, the max function, if you apply the max function to a range of blanks, it'll still return 0, which is sort of an odd behavior mathematically speaking, but it works well for us here. So if the answer is true, we have one of these corner cases. And so in that instance, we're going to say we could do 0 or did not work. I'm going to do did not work. If I was going to feed this back into some other program, I'd probably use a 0 or something like that, just so I keep everything the same type. But let's see, did not complete hours. I don't know, whatever you want to put in. Okay, so now the function tests to see if we've got a corner case. If it is a corner case, it's going to return did not complete hours. Otherwise, it's going to return the position. So let's add ourselves just a little more white space here. Let's see, make it a little bit easier to look at what we're doing. And if I hit Control-Shift-Enter, and I'm going to click and drag that down, double-click that, expand out. Now we've got the solution that we want. Just do one more thing here, Control-C, Control-Shift-Down arrow, Control-Alt-V, T for formats. Clean it up just a little bit, Alt-H-A-R to assign, to align right. Just cleaning it up visually. And there we've got the results that we want. Okay, so I think in the next video we're gonna deal with the same problem, but we're gonna deal with it using Power Query, which is actually a little more work on the front end. But if you're doing this a lot, it may save you some time in the long run. All right, well I think that was I hope that was helpful, and I will see you next video.